Can everyone hear me? All right, good morning. And welcome everyone to our 5th annual security conference. This year, the theme of the conference is Turkey in Regional and Global Affairs. And I am very, very thankful to our participants who were able to make it to Lawrence despite the weather predicaments. And I'm very thrilled to see so many people in the audience, in spite of the same reasons. What a dedication to knowledge and quite an interest in Turkish affairs. My name is Dr. Omelicheva, and I'm the director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, one of the organizers of this event. And I would like to also thank the sponsors and other organizers and people who did the work of bringing this conference together. This event is generously funded by the Army Research Office's grant. We've been using this grant to fund our annual security conferences. This conference is co-hosted by the Center for Global and International Studies, and its assistant director will speak to you a little bit after me. And I would like to thank the staff of both centers. Bart Redford, he's behind by the door, and Adrian Landry, and staff of CGIS in running all of the logistics and making this event possible. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be very successful. So, located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Turkey has always been pivotal in global affairs. And on the backdrop of major international developments such as Arab Spring in the Middle East and the global economic crisis, Turkey has been positioning itself as a game changer in the region and the world. So the goal of this conference, as I already mentioned, is to assess this country's role in regional and global contexts, its impact and foreign policy in relation to the Middle Eastern countries and other places all over the world. Because of the weather, we're going to have some changes to the program. Some of the conference participants were not able to make it to Lawrence. And one of the reasons we started a little bit later, but we'll keep all of the panels on time from now on, it was because we're still waiting for one presenter to come in. So in the first panel, we will have Dr. Ҫiftҫi, sorry, from Kansas State University, and Akram Karaboch, right, from SUNY. And another change to the conference, to the program, is that we're going to move Karan Kaya from the last panel to the first panel. So we're going to have 3 presenters, minus Mark Meirowitz and İhsan Dağı. Those 2 panelists were not able to make it to Kansas City and Lawrence. So I think that's the change for the morning. And then there will be some changes to the roundtable as well. And before I pass the mic to the Assistant Director of CGIS, Mike Wuthrich, I would like to bring your attention to yet another possibility to purchase wonderful studies, publications on the theme of Turkey in global and regional affairs. We will have a table set up on the 4th floor, right outside of the auditorium, from noon to 4. And I believe you should have coupon to purchase those books at 15% discount, or if you don't have the coupons, you can still purchase those publications with 15% discount. There will also be free copies of Turkish Review Journal. So if you're interested, to publish something in that journal, I believe there will be a representative of the journal. So if you're interested, talk to me or the Turkish Review's representative. And now I would like to pass on the mic to Dr. Wuthrich.
Thank you, Mariya, and particularly all the CREES folks. Working together with them for this conference has been pretty amazing. I'm not going to draw this out so we can move forward to the panel, but I just give you, in 2002, I left a teaching job here at KU and embarked on a journey to Turkey, to Ankara, to teach at Bilkent University. And I was there for 9 years. And it was amazing, really. I'd have to say life-changing. And as a researcher, I don't know if it's, there's always a danger that you get so close to something that you love and have come to appreciate and have such high regard for. But I've, over the course of that time, took a real interest in Turkey and have been doing research on it ever since. And in 2011, in a very bittersweet moment, I had to return from Turkey back, ironically, to where I had come in the beginning, KU, and leaving something I loved and came back to another place that I loved dearly. And when I came back to KU at that point, I was very excited to see how many things were going on in the international arena here, and the everything that was going on with the various area study centers and things that were developing on the Middle East, and even on Turkey, which I was obviously very thrilled about. So when Mariya first, Dr. Omelicheva, first approached me almost a year ago, and with this idea of this conference, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was thrown. Like, here's the opportunity of these two things separated by two things that I love dearly coming together at one moment for this conference. So I'm excited about what we have for you today. As someone who is an enthusiast of Turkey and knowing a lot of these scholars, I'm really excited about who we've been able to bring in for these papers and presentations. And I'm excited for us to present them to you, the audience, but I'm also excited for them to see you and see the enthusiasm that we have in KU for Turkey and for the world and the things that are going on here. And, I think, sometimes the Midwest gets lost in terms of assumptions about the internet, people that really care about international things, but I think it's safe to say that we really do care about those things here. And I think you are on a snowy, freezing cold day, in March when it shouldn't be like this. You're here at 8 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for that. I look forward with you for what we have going on today. Without much further ado, I want to move us on to our first panelist. I see that all of our panelists are here now. So let's begin. So we'll turn it over to the first panel. The chair of our first panel is an instructor here at KU, Nazlı Avdan. She's the assistant professor in political science, and let's begin.
Hello, welcome everybody to this first panel at 8:45 a.m. on the snowy morning, as Mariya announced. I am Dr. Nazlı Avdan. I am an assistant professor here in the political science department. I teach international politics, U.S. foreign policy. But today in this panel, we will be focusing on Turkish foreign policy. And this first panel is entitled Turkish Foreign Policy in the Middle East and Beyond. So I will be chairing this panel, and we'll go in the order that is on your packet, except for a few changes. Karen is here in our panel now, and two of our panelists are missing due to the weather impediments. So we will be starting with Sabri Ҫiftҫi, who is an assistant professor here at Kansas State University, our cousin institution, a few miles away, I think. And he specializes in comparative politics, attitudes towards democratization, democracy, Islam, and he's here now to talk about soft power and Turkey.
All right, thank you. All right, so good morning, and thank you for having me here. I don't know if I need the microphone. Is everybody okay? Can you hear me from the back? Okay, good. What's that? The microphone, if you would please, just so audible for everybody. Oh, for recording, you mean? Yeah, okay. So I'll actually try to stand here. Hopefully that works. I need to still catch my breath because I just got off the I-70. There is still quite a bit of ice, and I didn't actually factor this in as I was, driving this morning. So I just walked in actually, and I am the first presenter, so that works, I guess. So, but thank you for having me here. And I'm sorry that I missed, Mike's talk and other introductions. I will do my best to stay in my time limits. I was given 15 minutes, but I don't know, since there are two panelists missing, I was wondering if I can go to 20 minutes or not. Would that be okay? To the chair? 20 minutes would be okay?
20 minutes, so I'm just calculating three. Okay,
20,
let's do 20.
Hopefully I'll, finish it in 15 or so, but let's see. So the title of the talk is Turkey's Soft Power in the Middle East, Reality or Illusion, Middle Eastern Public Opinion toward Turkey in Comparative Perspective. So let me get the show started here. All right, so let me talk actually very briefly about the motivation that made me to write this paper. To start with, actually, Middle East is a highly contested space where both regional and global powers vie for power. And in the last decade or so, we have seen Turkey's increased activity in the Middle East. Turkey emerged as a regional power thanks to its economic growth on the one hand, but also thanks to this new foreign policy vision, which is actually now mentioned with Ahmet Davutoğlu and his doctrine of strategic depth, which is actually relying on a number of principles, but most importantly with the zero problems with the neighbors, which no longer I think is true, because Turkey looks like has problems with every possible neighbor that surrounds its borders. Nonetheless, this was the vision that directed Turkish foreign policy for about a decade or so. The other thing that's coming up actually based on this economic growth and increased Turkish involvement in the Middle East was the fact that all the surveys conducted in the region have seen Turkish image improving over time. And I've listed some of the surveys, and the paper actually has the details and provides some numbers from the surveys. But the bottom line is that Turkey's image is very positive, and in fact, Turkey is -- country in terms of the perceptions of the Middle Eastern publics. Okay, so then Turkey is the most favored country in the region compared to the level of anti-Americanism in the region. For example, the difference is actually quite fascinating, and the numbers I'm going to present will show that. Favorable ratings for the US is around 30% in the Middle East, but for Turkey, these are over 70%. So there's quite a bit of difference there. So then the starting point is what explains this positive attitudes toward Turkey among the Middle Eastern citizens. And I'm not going to actually spend a lot of time here about the background, but there are a number of theories here explaining why Turkey became such a, significant regional power. And this explanation actually range from economic theories pointing to facts like trading state, increased interaction or domestically, the change in the business structure where more pious businessmen take the stage, to identity related to Neo-Ottomanism, Islamization, and Middle Easternization of the foreign policy, and this political factor is also tied to the AKP rule. Being an Islamist party, obviously in quotation marks, some scholars argue that the new direction in Turkish foreign policy is largely due to AKP's identity and, or I should say, in fact, the identity that AKP sees fit for Turkey in the new Middle East. In this debate, the soft power strategies become really very prominent because during the Cold War and the aftermath, because of the security concerns, Turkey was largely known as a Cold War warrior because of its engagement not only in places like Syria and Iraq, but also elsewhere in the Middle East. And this is pretty much tied to the Kurdish insurgency problem. But there, as I said, Davutoğlu's strategy is pretty much trying to move away from that and prioritizing the soft power strategies. And some of you might have heard about the Turkish soap operas, which are now very popular in most of the Muslim world, in the Caucasian region and in the Balkans. This is part of it, but beyond that, the increased tourism, Turkish Airlines, its successes are all tied to the soft power activities of Turkey. And I said I'm going to finish it in 15. Doesn't look like that. So the main problem is that, with all this background information, what really explains this positive image of Turkey in the Middle East. One important problem, as I was actually sorting out the literature, is the fact that we are trying to explain why the Middle Eastern publics have this positive attitudes toward Turkey, yet most of our explanations are basically related to outside factors, not domestic public opinion in these respective nations. So the subject of inquiry is actually the domestic public opinion, yet the existing literature basically does not care much about the domestic factors related to the target audience. And they talk about, Turkey's increased power, Turkey's competition with Iran, and so on and so forth. But I didn't think that, the domestic factors related to the target audience were really factored in adequately. So this is the main goal of this paper, trying to, I'm trying to pay more attention to the target of this, regional power strategies, the domestic Middle Eastern public opinion. And let me actually, show this slide here, which basically is the starting point of my theoretical argument, where we start with regional power dynamics, and then we move to the domestic imperatives. Domestic in the sense that not the domestic Turkish public opinion, but the domestic public opinion of the target, target states or target countries. And then from there, attitudes toward international actors. Now, what this chart, let me stay here for a few seconds, is showing that, we need to actually pay attention to two factors. It's not only, let's say, Egyptian or Tunisian or Iranian public opinion. We also need to think about the regional power dynamics. And as I said in the beginning, Middle East is a contested space, and there is a lot of contestation going on for regional influence, more recently between Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. So we need to actually first think about this. And then second, we need to look at what's going on in the target countries domestically. What are the determinants of the public opinion in these target countries? So what actually I bring in as an explanation is, I'm sorry that this is a bit complicated, is that within this contestation for regional leadership between Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia as it is, we need to actually pay attention to things like what kind of regime will people prefer in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. We also need to pay attention to whether people desire a role for Islam in governance, which I think is a very, very prominent issue in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And then, this way, I argue we can actually explain favorability of Turkey and other regional powers. And as I said, it's basically in comparative perspective, because what I am arguing in the paper is that as people are presented with this different candidates for regional leadership, they will actually, weigh all options together. It's not like, oh, let me first make up my mind about Turkey, and then I'm going to move to Iran, and so on and so forth. So the argument is that, in human cognition, there should be actually a simultaneous decision-making process taken on. And I argue that, it's in comparative perspective in the sense that perceptions of Turkey are not independent from the perceptions of a country like Iran or Saudi Arabia. That's where the role of Islam in governance, comes in as an important factor. So basically, the argument in the paper is that these three countries, they actually present three different governance models, with each of these models arranging the state-religion relationships in a different way. Okay, so, and I also kind of really talk about the current political system and the identity factor as well in the paper. But the bottom line is that in Turkey, we are seeing actually a transforming secular order as opposed to Iran, where an Islamic state takes place, but the political rule of clergy is also very prominent. Basically, Iranian model deviates from the classical Islamic state because in the classical Islamic state, the clergy does not directly rule. More than this, they perform some sort of check or control on the political power. And finally, we have the Islamic monarchy model of Saudi Arabia, which is basically, I think, the perfect example of the classical Islamic state to the extent that the clergy is given the role of checking and balancing the political power. So I kind of based on this theoretical argument, I developed a number of hypotheses, mostly not only about the secular Islamist cleavage, but also about religiosity and Sunni versus Shia identity in the paper, and I can actually get to the details of those in the Q&A section. I used Pew Global Etudes project conducted in 2012. My sample includes 4 countries, Egypt, Tunisia, Lebanon, and Jordan. When missing values are excluded, slightly over 3,500 interviews. So the dependent variable is, tell me if you have a very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, or very unfavorable opinion of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And when you look at it, as I mentioned in the beginning, Turkey is by far the most favored country. Saudi Arabia comes really close with 65%. But look at Iran and the USA. So we have known about the anti-Americanism in the region for quite a while now. But seeing Iran there is also, I think, quite interesting. But still, Iran, if it was a competition, it's still kind of 2 points above the favorable ratings of the Americans. This chart actually shows from the data the breakdown of these views based on the country. So it's kind of hard. It may be hard to read some of this, but what's coming out of this is that Saudi Arabia, for example, which is actually the second, the middle group of bars presented here, it appears to be favored by Egypt and Jordan. And in the paper, I have some ideas about this, but still thinking about this. But when you look at Turkey, Turkey is favored across the board. It's not like only 1 or 2 countries which are closer in terms of their understanding of state-religion relations or other factors or Arabness. But across the board, Turkey is most favored, and not surprisingly, Iran is most favored by the Lebanon, and that's actually, I think, due to the Shia factor. How many minutes do I have? About 10, 5?
We've got about 3-4 minutes left.
3-4 minutes. Okay. So that means that I have to actually, get the turbo. So I can, discuss the details of the independent variables, but I do have indices combining multiple questions. I have religiosity, support for Islamic legislation, whether Sharia should be part of the legislation or not. I do have a variable measuring secularist orientation, which was quite fascinating to measure because Pew surveys do not offer a lot of options for measuring this kind of attitudes. But basically, it's a variable I hope will measure secularist orientation. I also have a variable looking at religious identities, Sunni versus Shia and other type of identities. Let me skip that and I can come to that. This is quite interesting too. I also control for support for democracy because Turkey does not only offer a secular model, but it also offers a democratic model, obviously. So support for democracy as well as the usual suspects, education, income, age, and gender are also controlled for. I use a model known as multivariate probit, and the reason I picked this model is that my argument is that individual attitudes will be connected if they are making their minds about these three different regional leaders. So this model actually controls for this kind of dependency, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. So let me actually skip the tables. I'm just kind of putting those up to show that I am not making this up. There are actually some real results. But let me actually, so I tried a set of different models here, including different control variables and so on. But what's really, and I also do a number of robust analysis, but what's really coming out of this is that secularly oriented individuals hold more favorable view of Turkey and less favorable views of Iran and Saudi Arabia. So as expected, if you are a secular, you would find the Turkish model more desirable. Those who desire a role for Islam in governance, on the other hand, are more supportive of Iran and less supportive of Turkey. The Saudi model does not appear to be the most favorite among these individuals. So this was a bit surprising for me because I was expecting the Saudi model to be more desirable, but it's not. Actually, people look onto the Iranian model more favorably. So overall, then the findings show that secular Islamist cleavage informs attitudes toward international actors. Not surprisingly, and I'm hoping Ekrem will be talking about that as well, this Sunni identity is the strongest predictor of favorability towards Saudi Arabia and in Turkey in all models. Personal religiosity, on the other hand, does not appear to have an effect on public opinion toward these three regional powers. So one question here is that, and I'm going to finish with that. There was a lot of debate about whether it was about Turkey's popularity versus Erdogan's popularity. So in the models, I also control for this, and what I find is that favorable views of Erdogan are positively related to favorable views of Turkey among the Middle Eastern public. So then the question becomes, what's driving what? Is it the popularity of Erdogan that's driving Turkey's positive image or vice versa? So I also kind of run a series of models to control for this. It looks like Turkey's favorability ratings are not driven only by Erdogan's popularity. Favorable views of Erdogan are partly explained by support for Islamic governance and Sunni identity. That is, so there is an Islamic factor that makes Erdogan more popular, and that was his policy position in the Middle East. For most of the time, he was kind of using these Islamic themes, the incident with the Sudanese president, the Islamic Organization Conference, his speeches there, meeting with negotiations and meeting with Hamas, the Israeli card that he was playing since his second term. These all show that from his part, these Islamic teams actually do work. So people favor him in the region because he has this he looks more like an Islamist rather than a secular leader. But on the other hand, the favorable views of Turkey are still robustly very much determined by its secular order. So if you are secular, when you control for Erdogan's popularity, you're still going to be favorable of Turkey. So overall then, Turkey is favored not because, as a country, I would argue, not because it employs an Islamist rhetoric, but because it represents a secular political institution. If we are going to actually argue that Turkey is actually going to be a country which is going to be more stable and persistent, and the leaders come and go over time, and I'm sure in the round table this afternoon we're going to have a chance to discuss this. then it's like basically the secular order that's more appealing to the Middle Eastern publics rather than some of these Islamist theme. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
I think now we're opening it up for Q&A for discussion.
Yeah, I'm Tom Wilhelm, Director of the Foreign Military Studies Office. Karen, your last slide actually was fascinating in that you indicated, hey, Turkey's important ties still remain NATO in the West in that regard. And it was sort of careful to say that that was Turkey's ties, but all of the previous two presentations were sort of getting down into the sort of the public attitudes, I think, although there was some talk of elite. So my question for you is, when you're defining a positive attitude or positive ties to NATO, what polity is that associated with? Is that the elites? Is there a public benefit to that? Does that spill over? Does it not? And if so, why?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, because I actually wanted to clarify something about that. For the NATO and US, I think I would guess that it's like the government and the public. Because when it comes down to it, like with the Syrian crisis, it was NATO that Turkey called on. But for some of the things that I said in my speech, like the policy that the government was following on Syria, that's actually was not supported by the public. So that was very much an Erdogan, like a AKP policy. So, but the last slide, the one that you're asking about, I think that is shared, because ultimately I think the US and NATO, like in terms of threats and dealing with threats, are the most important.
Then for the other two speakers, I have the obverse of that question. Because you were very clear, very detailed in pointing out that when you're looking at the aspects of religion, ethnicity, and secularism, as how to judge public opinions and attitudes, and one of the common themes was in the West, or I don't know about the West, but you said specifically the United States was low. How can we reconcile the difference between what Karen's putting out, positing that hey, there is a positive tie, a view with regard to security, the category of security. So I'd ask you to comment on how you would anticipate the public view, had you surveyed on attitudes towards security and where you identify feeling the most secure with relations with the West or independent or with one of the other neighbors, perhaps. I mean, obviously you didn't take that into consideration, so you'd have to extrapolate or just your opinion.
Me or both of us?
I'd be interested in either of you or both. Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't actually. Thank you for the question. And before I start answering the question, I was never alone in a room with so many Jayhawks present. So I will. Yeah, Jim is here. Hakan is here. So I have some support. That's good. So I'll do my best. I have not actually looked at that, and I think that's a very, very interesting point, because I think when we talk about international relations and public perceptions of regional or global leaders, security will appear to be one of the most important dimensions. But what I can only speculate about is to say that Turkey does not pose a threat to the publics of the countries which were surveyed and which were part of my analysis, and a lot of the anti-Americanisms, I think, tied to that. The U.S. foreign policies in the region. Because, when people were asked whether they dislike the U.S. for the policies versus the values, they highly praise the values. So in this regard, kind of trying to combine it with my own paper, there is the support for Turkey because it's secular, and I think a similar support will emerge there for the U.S. because it's secular and democratic. These are the values that most Middle Eastern publics value. But when it comes to security, I would think that it is basically the threat that people perceive from the U.S., which kind of increases the anti-American sentiment, and this may also partly account for the positive perception of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. For example, take Jordan. which has very, very high favorable ratings for Saudi Arabia. That's because Saudi Arabia is one of the allies which will supposedly provide security for Jordan or so on and so forth, but just at the speculative level because I don't really have the data, to say more. Yeah, yeah.
I don't have so much to say, but recently we wrote a paper on anti-Americanism, and one of the reasons that we have anti-Americanism, of course, the U.S. support for Israel is another issue, but the governments, domestic governments especially, using anti-Americanism to deflect domestic problems. It was the case up until Arab Spring. So those, and then when we look at some rigorous analysis like Sabri's, we saw that those who are there's so much negative association between anti-Americanism and support for government. Basically, those who hold anti-American attitudes, they were more basically the argument is that anti-Americanism is promoted by, let's say, Mubarak's government. We focus on the Egypt, and then this anti-Americanism actually deflects domestic problems, and as a result, it increases support for the Mubarak's regime. So, anti-Americanism is partly U.S. foreign policy, is partly domestically engineered, and the two factors are really playing an important role. And also, Turkish case, if you don't take a part, if you don't take sides, probably your prestige is really high. But if you start to take sides, like in Syrian conflict and other conflicts, of course you get so much criticism. Kelly, maybe you have so much to say.
Thank you very much. I have a comment and a question. A comment on your very early, Sabri, on your very early statistics, which shows overwhelming support, sort of favorable opinion of Turkey, afterwards Saudi Arabia. I should think that both Washington and everybody else should worry that a close third is China. No one spoke about it, but I think that the presence of China is becoming very much a factor in the Middle East. And speaking from recent developments in Israel, believe it or not, China is about to buy the main dairy factory in Israel, which produces billions and billions of dairy products. So China, I think, is very much the new player in this particular contested field. And I'm not entirely, you said that you used 3,500 opinions of 4 different countries. I don't know how many in each country. And you used various determinants to analyze their opinion. But I have 2 questions. One, to what extent do all these people in Jordan and Egypt and so forth are actually informed about what, for better term, I term the social protest movement in Turkey, which is, of course, connected with the developments in Istanbul and somewhere else, which, of course, have been supported by the government. In other words, the alliance of the regime with money. Simple as that. To what extent the people you serve are actually informed about internal, not just the external policies, but internal politics of Turkey in this particular respect.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for pointing your comment about China, and I definitely agree with that. I didn't actually, talk about this, but the one of the figures that I presented showed that China's favorable rating is only 3rd after Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And I think you could say this is into the phase of the EU, which was very proud of its, soft power strategies and so on, but China by far surpasses EU, as well as Russia and USA. So I think it's going to be an interesting, player in the region in the near future. As for your question, I have not actually control for that. And the surveys actually, and thank you very much. I think I will take this as a suggestion because I don't really have an answer for your question. But I think it's extremely important, particularly in a country like Jordan and Egypt, which are now defined as client states with the Saudi money pouring into these countries and the U.S. aid, the amount of the U.S. aid that they are receiving. I think it's very much tied to that. I mean, the regime's relation with the money, how people perceive their government, if they are benefiting from this money flow, and so on and so forth. And luckily, I think the peace surveys have these measures for Tunisia and Egypt. I'm not sure about other cases, but I will take this as a suggestion and take a look at this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Kemal Kirişçi, one of the next speakers. I have a question to follow up from the earlier one. Frankly, if I was in the State Department and looking at the slide that was referred to, I would be a bit puzzled at how come both Turkey and Saudi Arabia simultaneously are very similar in the eyes of the Middle Eastern public. They both seem to they seem to regard both as enjoying soft power. During the presentations, both Sabri and Ethem made references to Turkey's qualities as secular, democratic, and having a liberal market, whereas Saudi Arabia is the exact has the exact opposite qualities. So I have closely followed TESEV's surveys over the years, and have always maintained this puzzlement that I would think would puzzle the State Department too before worrying about China on that list. So my question is, how come the Middle Eastern public simultaneously perceive a strong soft power emerging from two countries that seem to be so different from each other?
My answer will be very brief. For Saudi Arabia and for Turkey, when you look at the soft power by, again, secularism versus religiosity, how religious they are, especially in Egypt, the base for Salafi movement was very strong, and the Salafis, especially 14% of Egyptian population lived in Saudi Arabia. And then when they come back to Saudi Arabia, actually this Salafi ideology was accepted and was promoted, and as a result, in the elections, 2012 election, they got about 26% of the votes. When you look at those people, and when you look at how they assess Saudi Arabia and Turkey, they assess Saudi Arabia more positively, significantly higher. So basically what I'm trying to say, these domestic religions also are reflected into how they see other countries. So when you look at the tables, it seems that, oh, they are very high, but when you look at the subgroups, the result varies. So these graphs actually may hide some truth, some cleavages in society. So when you look at the Christians and Muslims, you see so much contrast between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. When you look at the secular cleavage and religious cleavage, again, differently. That plays a role, something I can say. For China, my observation, I lived in Morocco sometime, what you see is that first China was accepted, was really embraced positively. The main reason is that China's economic development and its attitude as a potential rival to the West. So in the Middle East, any major power, including Turkey and China, seems to be accepted because it can be challenged to the West. So many problems are associated with the West, Arab-Israeli conflict, domestic problems and other things. So you find another rival, another major power, potential major power, and you tend to evaluate that rising power more positively. Something that, I can say, yeah.
Professor Kirişçi, thank you for asking this question. Not because it's very challenging and I don't have an answer for it, but some of my research also deals with this problem from a domestic regime preferences point of view. Here is what I come up with so far, based on my existing research. The citizens in these countries may like these regional powers for different reasons. It's not like a take it all or leave it question. It's not a zero-sum game. They may like certain characteristics of the Turkish regime, which appears to be not democracy but secularism, which is also an interesting finding itself. But they also desire, a large number of the publics in Middle Eastern countries desire a great role for Islam in governance. This is something that maybe the Saudi model would come close to, but they don't like the Saudi model for other reasons. So then, the answer would be, the short answer would be, they value different components from each country, which I think, it sounds eclectic, but this may really be what's going on the ground. They may desire a model that's neither Turkish nor Saudi, but combining elements from both, and they may be actually supporting this kind of, regime.
I had an interesting article about the TASEV studies too, and one of the findings with them was that the people that looked at Turkey as a model said that they looked at it as a model because it was, Muslim and secular and democratic, and the people that had said no, Turkey can't be a model had said that it's not Muslim enough, it's not secular enough, and it's not, Western, and it's Western. So maybe that helps answer, why they like Saudi Arabia too.
Yes, my name's Ivan Welch. I'm with the Foreign Military Studies Office. And this is another question about methodology. I'm really intrigued by your methodology. How do you control, or how do you think about, or how do you approach these historic factors like the aspect of the Ottoman Empire and Turkey's near-term relationship with the West since World War II? That's an interesting phenomena, and then you balance that against the custodian of the two holy mosques. If you get to be that as Saudi Arabia, how do you weigh that in these determinations of opinion and idea? And then thirdly, with Iran, they have been the spoiler for the West since the 1980s. So, and that's an interesting role in and of itself. So is there any way that you approach that in terms of your methodology?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, there is actually a theoretical discussion going on in the paper about exactly the things that you were referring to. So, why would a Saudi model would be attractive? The holy places versus why the Turkish model would be attractive. I do have an answer, though. I don't have the perfect measures, but I do some of the models that I did not present here. I use things like the degree of anti-Western values, to the extent that the publics are anti-Western, or anti-American sentiment as some of my controls, to account for some of that, at least. It's not a perfect measure, I realize, but what I am trying to capture in these models is, if they like Iran because it's anti-American, I should be able to see this in the models when I include a measure of anti-Americanism, right? Or if they are anti-Western, they don't like the Western values, which is part of this, secular Islamist cleavage, argument, then they shouldn't be liking Turkey and so on and so forth. And the reason I didn't present these models, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on there, because things are not really appearing as I would expect them to. So I'm just kind of thinking why. Maybe these historical facts do not play a bigger role, in the sense that the studies have proven that most of the attitudes are formed on the spot as you are asking the question. When you ask a question to a person about whether you like the U.S. or not, they're not going to think about their high school history and try to form an opinion. It's just on the spot. And this may be my answer, though I do have measures, and I'm looking forward to kind of refine those and see whether this historical factor in the form of generating values have an effect on some of these favorable ratings or not. I know it's not an answer, but just like work in progress. So that's what I have for now.
With the models that we run, I agree with Sabri, you cannot rigorously test the arguments. You have to have either more countries, you have to have more data, more so that you can test. Let's say that if we have 30 countries, and then we were able to incorporate institutional factors and discriminations that the ethnic and religious minorities face. So these things actually play a role in the theory, but in the data, so this is part of the theory, but in the model that we have and Sabri has, we cannot control. But at least it's in a preliminary research, and it may open a new phase, so many people may have better data, may rigorously test. Otherwise, we are limited. Yeah.
One of the points made in these excellent presentations. One of the points made in these excellent presentations was that ethnicity matters. So, if we were playing a word association game, and someone said the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, what comes to my mind is Alawite. And when I think of Alawite, I think of Hatay province. And when I think in Turkey, its southernmost province, and when I think of that, that makes me wonder about the idea of Turkish nationalism in that province. So did any of your data suggest anything that had to do with how strong Turkish nationalism was or was not in that province? Because I believe at one time it did belong to Syria. And it's just something I was curious about.
Initially, we wanted to survey in Syria, and then we had certain questions, how they look at Alawites in Turkey. We couldn't. But I know a couple of research. The Hatay was an independent state, right, just briefly. So the research suggests, I think David Ramono then did some field research, and according to his research, there is not so much separatist attitude in the province. So you don't see very much strong at that time. I'm talking about maybe 2 years back. So I talked to him, and just he gave a talk in Mesa last time. There was not so much separatist attitudes, but of course wonder why. That I don't have that answer. Sabri.
I don't have any measures, unfortunately, about Turkey, but I think I would disagree with that, maybe because some of my other research shows that there is a nationalism, but it has a religious flavor in most of Turkey as well as in the southern provinces. But I don't really know what kind of role that would play.
I had a question for the first speaker about Turkish soft power, and this refers to this Mr. Gulen, Fethullah Gulen. My understanding was he was sort of the guy working behind the scenes to spread Turkish soft power around the world. Now that there's been sort of a break between Mr. Gulen and Prime Minister Erdogan, is he now spreading a bad message about Turkey?
Again, this would be speculation, not relying on any data. I don't think so. In the sense that looks like, one aspect of the cleavage between AKP and the Gulen movement concerns the foreign policy. So increasing Turkey's positive image in the Middle East is to the interest of both AKP and the Gulen movement. So I don't think that there is a split here, but there is a split in the vision, right? An anti-Israeli policy is not within the vision of the Gulen movement, right? So an approach to Iran, for example, would be troubling to the movement, from what I understand. But this doesn't mean that they are going to spread a negative image of Turkey, because in the long run, I think it's to their best interest that they have schools and other sort of activities going on in these countries. But I think it's just a split in terms of foreign policy between the strategies that Turkey should pursue, whether Turkey should dissociate from the West, totally Middle Easternize, as opposed to an image where Turkey actually keeps its foot on the West in combination with Israel, but also has a very positive image of the Middle East. I don't know if this is answering, but that's what I see, how I see it, just as at a speculative level, not based on any data. I don't know if the other speakers would like to.
Hi, I have a question about our elections. We have 3 elections within 2 years, next 2 years. So after elections, does the Turkish foreign policy change? For example, if a new government new party come to the government, so our foreign policy will change or not? Thank you.
I think that the roundtable is going to address that question. There's going to be a whole roundtable discussion on that question. So maybe we should hold off on that, if you agree.
Sorry, just a brief comment in response to the gentleman who reminded us of the Ottoman Empire. That I think that one of the most striking lacking aspects in any political analysis is precisely the historical perspectives. Yes, I am biased because I happen to be a historian of the Middle East in antiquity, but I think that the historical perspectives are very sadly lacking. This said, you may be interested that in the recent, in the papers in Israel very recently, there actually were articles about the extremely favorable attitude of the Ottoman Empire to the expelled Jews from Spain, Portugal, and other places in Western Europe. So it was a very interesting reminder of the religious tolerance of the Ottoman Empire in its heyday. So thank you for that comment.
Any other questions?
It's a general question. I heard in one of the papers that the word elite mentions. You know, has the image of who the elite is and how it has changed, at least in the last decade or so, or 2 decades in Turkey, has any significance, or how it has changed? Can that be sort of summarized? And is that a difference from the general population? Because there are these surveys that I don't know whether they are random surveys or how it was, what methodology it gave it birth. But the image of the elite, has it changed, or what does it mean these days? Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you ask the question to a specific person, or is it general?
Anyone.
Okay, I can say a couple of things. I don't know if it's going to be a direct answer. But some of the results I presented here, they show that there's actually an interesting pattern, which I need to think more carefully about. Is that the perception of elite definitely changed, and this is actually not only based on the data, but my personal interaction with some of my Arab friends, is that Turkey for a long time was viewed as a country which doesn't like Islam, and Kemal Atatürk was basically the frame that they would provide in their dislike towards Turkey. But this has certainly changed with Erdogan. So in terms of the public perception, I think the public is knowledgeable enough to distinguish between different, elites in this, regional aspirers in countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And what I want to say, without actually maybe taking more time, is when you control for the popularity of, let's say, Ahmadinejad versus King Abdullah versus Erdogan, like 3 different types of elite that we are talking about. It is interesting that people actually differentiate between Erdogan and Turkey's image, and they do not actually find the difference between, let's say, when you look at the attitudes, there's a large overlap between, let's say, favorability of Ahmadinejad and King Abdullah vis-a-vis the their respective countries, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Other than this, so the conclusion would be yes, they can, they are aware of this, like, elite profiles, and they can distinguish, make distinctions among these different profiles. But Ekrem's survey, it does, like, they also have an elite component,
Yeah.
I think.
So my two friends, two Turkish scholars, did fieldwork in Iran, Iraq, and Egypt, and they talked to elites. Elites basically means that academics in universities, journalists, and bureaucrats, and some policymakers. So based on their interviews, we can say that when you talk to elites, they get clue most of the time from the leaders. They look at Erdogan, they look at Davutoğlu, and they look at their ideological orientation, and they make up their mind. So according to them, yes, because of the Erdogan, Turkey was taking more taking more proactive policies in the region, and it was really affecting the perception of Turkey. Very similar to public opinion. People don't know so much about Turkish foreign policy, but they make up their mind about different issues by looking at the elites and their orientation, how they are portrayed in media. Especially in public opinion, we know that Al Jazeera played a very important role, especially starting from 2000, 2008, 2009, and Turkey was portrayed as a model. And when you look at Al Jazeera, again, so much discussion about the Turkish model. Again, elites play a role, and the media plays a role, and whether the public opinion or the elites make up their mind by looking at these shortcuts. So, yeah.
Okay. Before we break for the refreshments and networking break, I would like to make a couple of announcements. One is, if you're not here for the entire day and would like to leave earlier, we would ask you to fill out an evaluation form. We are going to be applying for funding next year to continue with these annual security conferences. So we would appreciate your sincere, constructive feedback on how well we're doing. So the participants have evaluation forms in your folders, but everyone else, there are unfilled forms on the table right in front of the door. So please do not leave the building without filling one out. Just to follow up Karen's comment, a lot of the questions that were asked at the end of this panel will be elaborated on further in the upcoming roundtable. So please stick around, stretch, take a break, and we will be back here at 10:45.